Okay, we are joined by Jessica Jackley of Kiva and Ken Banks of Kiwanja and Minouche Shafik, our government representative. I'm going to start with Jessica and with Ken, and then we'll hear from Minouche, and I hope that Howard will jump into the conversation also, because as he mentioned, he personally and Starbucks as a company is really engaged in these issues. So Jessica, maybe you could tell us a little bit the story of what Kiva does, and also, interestingly, the way that you have extended what you do in the NGO space into the for-profit space, using the way you learned how to raise money for NGOs to raise money for small businesses.
Sure. So for those who have not been to the website, kiva.org, it's a peer-to-peer micro-lending platform. So Kiva lets anybody who has an internet connection and a credit card or a PayPal account go online, browse profiles of entrepreneurs all over the world that need a small loan, usually just a few $100s, and then lend $25 or more to that entrepreneur. And then over time, you get updates on how that entrepreneur is doing, and you get paid back. Kiva began, I guess, just over 4.5 years ago, and today facilitates a little over $1 million a week on average, sometimes much higher, from lenders to entrepreneurs and back in 196 countries. So it's grown very rapidly. And it was born out of a desire to tell a new story about the poor. So I was thinking about this. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and most of the stories of poverty that I heard in my life were ones focused on sadness and suffering. And most of the ways that I was invited to engage were ways that made me feel really bad or guilty or shameful. I don't know if the Sally Struthers, infomercials were popular here, but for the cost of a cup of coffee, no offense, you could do so much more, right, with that money.
Maybe
No, I know.
Do it.
Well, actually, I remember thinking like, okay, but I really like my coffee. Can I do both? Should I just give like a little bit more than my cup of coffee? So I remember growing up thinking about, and only having these emotional reactions of guilt and shame interacting with the poor. And for me, I think that's a really screwed up false dichotomy that is perpetuated by a lot of organizations that ironically actually seek to alleviate poverty. You get into this sort of donor-beneficiary mentality, and it's not healthy. And I can talk about that more if that's interesting. But I stepped away from Kiva several months ago to do a new startup. It's very similar in nature. So
Except it's going to make money for you, right?
Well, we'll see. I think it's a tax code, not a religion. So Kiva's a 501c3, but bizarrely, it's been more profitable as a nonprofit than it would have been as a for-profit. And again, I can happily talk about that. I don't have the money in my pockets, that's fine. But we were able to do what we needed to do more quickly by being that tax structure. But so yes, ProFounder is the new startup, and it's a crowdfunding platform that just launched last week privately for US entrepreneurs to raise money, investment capital from their friends and families. So it turns out that the vast majority of small businesses in the US actually raise their funding, find their funding, whether it's at the beginning to launch or later on to grow, from their friends and family. But there's no really easy way to do this in terms of an investment. There are loan opportunities, and obviously I'm a fan of that. There are a lot of donation platforms, but there's no way to raise investment capital online from your community. So we figured out ways to do that.
So is this going to be a way around the credit crunch and the lack of lending by US banks? You're the alternative?
I sure hope so. That's the goal. That's the goal. So yeah, I can talk a lot on this, and I am well caffeinated, so I am very thankful for the whole coffee thread in this story of mine. But yeah, we're really looking forward in the fall to having a public launch where anybody raising up to $1 million can do that through our platform from an unlimited number of friends and family investors and supporters.
Okay. Yep. I'd like to bring Ken into the conversation, and Kiwanja, Ken's, I don't know, I should call it a company, Ken's
organization
project,
is probably the best.
brings together anthropology, conservation, and development. And this is a really exciting way, particularly in Africa, to use social media. Tell us about it.
Sure. So first of all, it's great to be here. Some fantastic names, and I recognise most of them, unlike most of you who don't recognise mine, probably.
I was going to say, we recognise you too.
Well, maybe you do a little bit. I think for me, I've got a number of passions in the world, and when I was younger, picking one to actually pursue as a career was almost impossible. So I decided the best thing to do was create the job that didn't exist. So my background is IT, 26 years in IT. I've been doing work projects in many African countries for about 17, 18 years. My degree is social anthropology. I stumbled into mobile, and they all kind of mix together really quite well. I think if we think about technology, there's often a tendency to think about it from a technological standpoint. I think in the West, we're all very excited about iPhones and GPS and all the amazing things that mobile technology can do. But there's actually a divide in the world, and there's actually a very different world out there for people who don't have the luxuries of that, not just in terms of not having access to the technology, but also not having the income to be able to browse the web freely and to tweet and to go on Facebook and so on. I was very lucky to get into mobile at the beginning of 2003, and things were just really starting to happen then. It was very early days, and people were thinking that, hey, that there might be something for the development community that actually might be useful in terms of promoting better conditions for people in the developing world. The anthropology is really interesting, I think, because it actually brings the focus back to people. We do tend to get very excited by the iPhone 4G and all the iPads and all this type of thing, but there's actually, at the end of the day, people do use the technologies that we're building, and sometimes I think we forget that. A user in a developing country on $2 a day will have very different needs out of a mobile phone than we will. And there are a couple of pictures, actually, which, if this works, if I click this. So I think if we look at how mobile phone companies even market to these people, this is a picture took in Uganda about 3 years ago, when I was working on the Google project, actually, an early Google project. And it's an advert for a torch, primarily, but it happens to be a mobile phone. And people that are buying these devices have big problems at home with power. They can't see around their houses. They can't find things at night. So selling this device with a big emphasis on it being a torch is actually a very interesting way of thinking about how you market to people in these kinds of areas. And anthropology helps you understand how these things are needed and how you go about thinking about how mobile technology actually should be and can be developed to be slightly more relevant to different markets.
And tell us about Kiwanja.
Well, Kiwanja.net, it's really just another name for me. It's just a website address. KenBanks.com had gone in 2003. KennyBanks.com is an evangelical Christian singer, so I couldn't take that one. So I just picked a name which sounded non-technical. I was very keen not to register tech365.com. Hopefully nobody in the room has actually got that URL. And just to have something which was tech neutral. So Kiwanja.net it's just another name for me, but we do have a US foundation called the Kiwanja Foundation, which is a 501c3. All the money that we raise is US based. We were chatting earlier about it's so hard to find the money in the UK for the kind of things that we do. US investors or US foundations seem to just get it. Or even US companies. Right. So we have some very good donors in the US, and luckily the dollar rate's going in our favor when we bring the money back, which I think is important. But the organization is basically trying to focus on how we take mobile technology and make it more useful, mostly to non-profits in developing countries who are actually doing the work that we try to do often directly in error, I think. I think we need to think more about how we empower the people on the ground already rather than all jumping on a plane and trying to fix the problems ourselves, because we usually don't have a clue how to do that.
Okay, well, that is a perfect segue into what Minouche wanted to at least begin her comments on. Minouche is the permanent secretary of the Department for International Development. And I was going to ask her, these are great ideas, these are great projects. How do you get scale, though? The problems are really, really big. How do you make a difference?
Maybe I'll start by just saying what I do. I manage a UK government department which manages the UK's aid overseas, sort of the opposite of entrepreneurship, you may think. But I hope I can persuade you that that's not the case. There is a huge role for government support in making a lot of these kinds of things possible. All of you know the revolution about telecommunications in Africa and Asia. There are more mobile phones in India today than there are toilets. In Africa, mobile telephony has completely revolutionized communications across the continent. None of that would have been possible if those governments hadn't changed their regulatory environments to make it possible for mobile phone operators to operate. So huge role. In a previous life, when I was at the World Bank, we advised maybe 100 countries around the world how to liberalize their telecom markets and make it possible for these kinds of innovations.
So first job of government is
create the right policy environment, make sure you regulate in a way that makes these kind of innovations and technology possible. Second, to invest in early in some of these innovative ideas before they are scalable. So the department I run has invested in a huge number of some of these mobile technologies to enable poor people to get access to them. So just as an example, in Kenya, we fund a program called M-Pesa, which has provided mobile telephony to 8 million people. We've now actually, the sort of next generation issue is using these in new and interesting ways to reduce poverty, a little bit what you were talking about with Kiva. So branchless banking, suddenly we can think about banking and financial services in a whole new way without having to create bank branches. And in many countries, mobile telephony has absolutely reduced the cost of banking for millions and millions of people. If you're a poor woman without a bank account and running a market stall in Africa, if you can do all your banking by your mobile, it is phenomenal in terms of the impact on your costs, your marketing capacity. If you're a rural farmer in Ghana, there are now systems whereby they can, rather than take their crops to market when the price is low, they can call, they can find out when the price is right, where the most profitable deal is, and take their crops there instead. And maybe I'll just say one more thing. It's now come full circle. So in many countries in the world, governments, and we're funding a lot of them, are actually using branchless banking and mobile phones to deliver welfare payments to the very poorest people in their population. So in countries like Brazil, India, South Africa, governments are now delivering to 170 million poor people around the world very small cash payments for widows, orphans, people with HIV, who are receiving small benefits from government using mobile telephony. So it's come full circle, whereby now governments, by creating the right regulatory environment, are actually using those new innovative private sector mobile branchless services to deliver social welfare payments and deliver government services dramatically more cheaply than ever before.
So, Minouche, I was in Tanzania last week, and this sort of critique that we're starting to hear from Africans about the whole notion of aid, a lot of people there were very excited about and said, you know what, that's absolutely right. And this idea that aid actually has been really bad for us, has made us dependent, and the main beneficiaries of it are this sort of Western aristocracy of aid workers who live in houses with swimming pools and seem to have a great exotic life. How much sympathy do you have with that idea? And if you do, how should it be shaping all of these projects?
I think there is some truth to that, because some kinds of aid are very badly managed, and it's aid that's tied to buying the goods of the country that sent it, for example. And so I'll give you my aid, but you have to spend it on my consultants and my products. Not good aid. Tends to be more
What
expensive.
Archbishop Tutu had to say about Western cows this morning?
For example. But on the other hand, there are some kinds of aid, I'd like to think the kind of aid that we give, which is actually consistent with, rather than imposing the donors' priorities and the donors' systems and the donors' products, is about working with countries to support them on their priorities, using their systems and spending it on the things they want. I also have to say that I think there is no escaping the fact that there are some things that governments have to do, harking back to the healthcare discussion earlier. My department paid for 5 million kids to go to school last year, and we did that at a cost of about £60 or about $100 per child. We're talking very large scale, and things like that, it's great if the private sector wants to have charities that promote school construction, but in the end, there are some core functions that governments have to do, and good donors have to work with governments to provide financing to do those things.
So Howard, your perspective on that?
I think one thing that's going to happen as a result of what's going on throughout the world in terms of the debt that these governments are under is that corporations are going to be asked to do more, and I think the expectations of society is going to be that business is going to have to contribute more. So there is, I think, a seismic shift about to occur as a result of these social issues that governments are going to face that they're not going to be able to fund. So I think companies that have this already built into the DNA and into their fabric will have an advantage. And those companies who I think turn away and either don't do it or are not authentic about it, the consumer and their people will recognize this is not a company that's consistent with the values that I want to live by. But I think it's going to get more expensive for business as a result of the needs that society has that government is not going to be able to fulfill.
When you say it, you mean just operating is going to be more expensive for business?
Yes.
And how is business going to be making the decision about helping people at home and helping people around the world, especially at a time when say you said double-digit U.S. unemployment as far as the eye can see?
Well, I think that's it's a very difficult question to specifically answer. I think the companies of tomorrow will find a way to successfully balance profitability and benevolence and having a social conscience. If a company is doing work or getting resources abroad or from developing countries, they have an inherent responsibility to make sure they're just not taking from those countries. Starbucks buys coffee from 28 producing countries. We've been doing things in those countries for almost 40 years, but not for the sole purpose of issuing a press release and telling the world we do it, but doing it for the right thing. The partnership that we've developed in Rwanda with President Kagame is exactly what you just said, and that is a co-authored partnership from day one, which is not aid-driven, but creating sustainable trade and sustainable jobs. And the other thing I'd say is it costs a child in Rwanda $350 a year to go to middle school. And we should be able to galvanize some efforts to be able to send kids to school at a cost of $350 a year, as opposed to many of the things we do that really just throw money against a wall and don't work.
Such as?
I think we've given a fair amount of money to Katrina. We gave a fair amount of money to Haiti, and then you hear terrible stories about whether or not the money was used in the proper way, because you can't follow it, you can't track it.
I think Minouche wanted to jump in.
Sorry.
Just to support that, I mean, I think also public opinion has changed. I mean, we observe in the UK, for example, that if you look at, it's been tough economic times, but sales of fair trade have actually held up incredibly well.
They've gone up here in the
and
UK.
they've gone up in the UK. Sales of organic have actually taken a hit, which I think is very revealing. It says, organic is about taking care of yourself. Fair trade is about sharing with others. And I think it's quite interesting that in really tough economic times, fair trade has done well.
Have you seen that? More people
We
are
have
worried
seen-
about fair trade, but people less worried about
I
organic stuff?
didn't know the statistic about organic, but fair trade products have gone up. Fair trade coffee at Starbucks has gone up here in the UK, primarily because people want to support those organizations that they believe in and that they trust. It's very revealing.
Jessica, all this is so interesting. I liked what you were saying about, the perspective in Tanzania and elsewhere in Africa and all over the world of maybe traditional ways of doing aid work not really working out. And so I'm not always. I think a lot in terms of.
You are representing an alternative model, right?
Yeah.
Instead of me giving my money to the widows and orphans type charity, I could fund some great business that I like from Kiva.
Exactly. And I think giving that option. So I believe the ways that we have out there to get people involved, they really actually do matter a lot. Like if you're used to donating, and again, I like to think in terms of the person-to-person, peer-to-peer models, so that's where my mind is. But a government is a bunch of people and elected by a bunch of people, individuals, and so are corporations, right? They're a bunch of individuals that have their own intentions. And it's easy to, I think, talk about things at a high level. And maybe not always that easy, actually. I like to talk about them in the person-to-person way. And so I think about when I donate or even when I invest, whatever it is I'm doing with my money and my time and my other resources, and whatever it is I'm getting back, that sends a really big message both ways. And so Kiva's just one. It's not the silver bullet, but it's something that I believe in because it's a 0% loan. The way it works, to just explain a little bit more, is lenders go to the website, they find an entrepreneur. Those entrepreneurs have been posted there. Their pictures, their stories, those profiles have been posted by a microfinance institution out there in the world, the Grameen banks of the world. Many of you know that organization. They post that information, and then over time, as the loan is repaid, updates go back and forth as well, right? And lenders can say hello to the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneurs will provide updates back and photos and things like that. That exchange of money and information, that very particular way, it's a zero-interest loan between lenders and entrepreneurs. So they're not making money, and they're not writing it off as a tax-deductible donation, but they are getting their money back. And at $25 or $50, financially speaking, that's actually fine and a good thing. But they're also getting this interaction that is of an equal partnership connection, and that is huge. And in fact, that's the thing that I think that does make Kiva unique in the world. And I think more tools like that, more mechanisms like that should exist, because to be able to say to a woman living in sub-Saharan Africa, not I'm the donor that's going to swoop in and save you, right? That's not good. And not necessarily always, I'm the investor that's only out to serve you if I think I can make money off of you and do a bottom of the pyramid type thing. That's not always great either, but to say, look, I trust you, I believe in you, your story's important, and I want to participate in the next chapter, and then just pay me back and we'll call it even. That's a really beautiful connection. And that's what I care about a lot. I think the work being done out there by microfinance institutions, the thousands of them that exist, is lovely and is amazing. And I've been very privileged to get to be a part of some of that. But what I really get excited about is changing the way lenders think and changing the way, I talked a lot about growing up with these stories of sadness. Maybe there's a little girl growing up in Pennsylvania today where I grew up, and instead she's learning for the first time about a woman living in sub-Saharan Africa as a smart, strong, hardworking entrepreneur, not as somebody whose only story to be told is one of sadness and suffering. So that's what I care about. And I think that can trickle up into the, not just from how we think and believe in the possibilities and potential of one another, but in how we design the organizations that we work for, the companies that we work for and run, and how the governments that we elect do their thing too.
Okay, I can see that Howard really wants to hire you right away because I think you're a great saleswoman, and that insight that people like stories, which also Professor Kahneman was talking to us about, is really psychologically acute. But do you worry ever that there's a certain kind of beauty contest phenomenon that happens on Kiva, and that maybe the people who are most attractive to us, when we're wanting to feel good about ourselves, wanting to find someone to give money to, that maybe we don't give money to the right people. Maybe we give money to, the lovely lady with the story that feels good to me, but not to the person who needs it the most.
No, that's a really fun question. Well, I guess we'd get into the debate about, well, who does need it the most, and what are you measuring on, and who's to say what's the best? I don't believe there are a lot of shoulds in life, and I even think on Kiva, I talk to classrooms of first graders who have all brought in $1 and then lend to the picture of the entrepreneur with the fluffy sheep because the sheep are cute. That's fine, good for them. There are some people who are hardcore capitalists that talk about interest rates and talk about, there are some people that say, look, I'm a single mom with 3 kids, and this woman that I've loaned to is a single mom with 3 kids. I don't think there's I personally don't want to be prescriptive.
Is there a particular group that has the hardest time attracting money?
It's hard. It depends on how you slice it. So I can tell you for sure that this is little anecdotal stuff. So I know that an African woman raising money for some, an agriculturally based business, at least a few months ago when I was looking at this,
that's
raises
like
money 10 times. Right. Actually, there's other stuff too. You're right. There's some funny, quirky things like, are they smiling in the picture and other stuff. Is there the mention of education anywhere in the profile, things like that. But then, a Bulgarian man will get his loan funded 10 times more slowly than that woman. But it's all different kind of qualities and characteristics.
Ugly Bulgarian man
but the crazy
with
thing
no
is,
agriculture.
Right. Well, actually, it depends. What does the scene look like? Are they in a very rural setting? Are they in an urban setting? Is it a taxi driver that has like a car? That seems different. That feels different than the woman with the fruit stand sitting on, a pile of a very makeshift sort of fruit stand that she's made out of some sticks and some plastic and stuff. But again, I certainly have my own opinions on this stuff, but I think it's more important to engage other people and allow them to shape their own opinions. And what's been really interesting is that Kiva's biggest problem historically has been running out of loans. So it's not exactly like the poor Bulgarian man isn't getting funded. He's getting funded like in a day versus a few hours. So it's all working out just fine so far.
Ken?
Yeah, I think the wider discussion about aid and how it's delivered and the empowerment thing, the model we have is very much a pull model. So over the last 17 years or so, working in various African countries, you get a sense that people actually know how to solve their own problems. And they don't need people flying over and really taking control of it. If we think about development from the 70s, think about early sort of development where, dam building projects and large infrastructure projects. Development was kind of it was the realm of governments and large international
donors. And World
donors.
Bank, where Minouche used to work.
Right, yeah. But mobile phones have actually, a teenager in a bedroom can write a mobile-based application, and within hours it can be on the web, and it can be being used by people all around the world. And it's actually, it's not that hard to do. The hard thing is finding out what you fix and understanding what the problem is and the best way of doing it. But the technology is there to allow people to do this. And I think mobile technology has probably done more for development than a lot of aid has done. And if you also look on the ground at how entrepreneurs are using the technology and the businesses they're building up, there's no manual for a lot of this stuff. People are just figuring it out. And the NGOs that we work through, it's all very much a pull. So we make the software available. It's called Frontline SMS. It's a piece of software you put onto a laptop. You attach a mobile phone with a cable, and it does two-way group messaging. So once you've downloaded it off the internet, you can move away, and anywhere there's a mobile phone signal, you can do two-way group messaging with healthcare workers, farmers, human rights activists,
In
NGO staff,
disaster-type situations,
disaster
very
situations. That's
effectively?
right. I mean, it's been used in over 50 countries now. Late last year, we won an award, a tech award in Silicon Valley, and it was great to win it. No one had ever heard of tech awards, so that was the only downside. But when I went to actually pick up the award, they said, can you send us pictures of you in the field with the users? And I actually have none. We've been doing it for 5 years. We have users in 50 countries, 8,000 odd downloads. And I've never been to do any of the installations because for me, it's about making the tools available. Let the people on the ground find them, and that's part of the challenge. How do you promote and market to grassroots NGOs who don't spend all day on the web? But once they find it, let them download it, let them install it, let them put their names and contacts in, let them figure out how they use it and how they apply it in their work. And you'll be amazed how empowered those users feel when they're able to do all that without a white guy having to fly over and do a couple of weeks of consultancy. I mean, it's not a revelation, I don't think, to do it that way. It's just a different way of doing it. And I think we have to try and think a little bit more about how we genuinely empower people with the technology. And I think mobile is probably unique, really, in what it can do, because people can literally just take things. And African developers are building all sorts of things on their own back. We have M-Pesa, which you've already mentioned, which DFID funded. But if I was in Nairobi now, I could pay for a cab home with my mobile phone. We can't do that. We can't do that here. You can buy mobile phones with solar panels on the back to allow you to charge them through the sun. Why don't we have these things? So, we're actually seeing innovation now going two ways, and I think that's what makes it really, really exciting for me. We're actually learning from them, rather than us having all the answers and sort of just flying around and telling people what to do. And of course, local NGOs understand the culture, the language, the landscape, the geography. They know if women are allowed to use phones before you spend $1 million on a project to give women phones. They kind of understand all these things. So let's focus more on how we build tools that genuinely allow them to take them and do their own thing, and just act as a sort of supporting role. And I think it's working well for us, but it's challenging. But for me, I just feel...
I mean, we've heard from Minouche, who clearly is with the program. Are governments, though, and sort of World Bank, are they sufficiently thinking this way, or do you think they still have a way to go? Is it still too much a top-down approach?
Well, no, regulation, as you said, is hugely important. I think you have to remember that mobile phone technology, it's the private sector that's created what we have now. If mobile technology in developing countries was an aid project, we probably wouldn't have anything like the kind of coverage we have now, because it just wouldn't have happened. So the private sector are jumping all over it because you can make money very, very quickly. And of course, the environment has to be right. I was speaking to somebody who was trying to monitor the Sudanese elections with our software, and they decided against it in the end. It was just too dangerous to expect people to send information in to a central point and be detected by the government and potentially, get in big trouble. So there are situations where the environment has to be conducive to this kind of thing happening, and certainly regulation is a big one. In opening up competition, when I was in Uganda with a picture was taken of the phone, they introduced 2 new operators in those 2 or 3 months that I was there. Prices came crashing down. All sorts of people started panicking, the mobile world. But it actually was good for the consumer. So in those examples, I think regulation is a key driver. And in countries with only one operator, which is usually government run, prices are usually high. It's very hard to get SIM cards. Infrastructure's poor. So yeah, I mean, I'm all for the private.
Government operators are rich.
They're also slow. If you look at the landline infrastructure in places like Nigeria, where I spent a year, I mean, it just doesn't work because there's just no real incentive to do anything with it.
Okay, we'll take questions from the audience in 1 minute, so please come to the mics while you do that. Oh, come on, I know it's the last session of the day, or second last session of the day. Yes, there's one more left, but a little more enthusiasm, please. And I'm just going to ask Howard, you are an entrepreneur, but now you run a really, really big company. How do you incorporate the kind of entrepreneurial stuff in your social engagement that we've just been hearing about? Are you too big to do that now?
No, there's no bifurcation between our efforts entrepreneurially to give back or engage in helping others who have been left behind versus what we're trying to do for the consumer. I think it's wrapped into the way in which we just do our business. I think if you look at the last 2 months of what happened with Toyota what's going on with BP, what's happened to the banking sector in America, you know, there's a fracturing of confidence, and this is a time where I think there should be no dilution whatsoever in terms of what companies stand for, what they are willing to do, and their efforts in terms of consumer-facing versus giving back should be the same. And I think that adds up to an enduring company doing the right thing.
Do you ever worry, I mean, you've emphasized this idea of being authentic
Yes.
in what you do. Do you ever worry that a cynical journalist type person might say, well, that's great
Right.
that you do this fair trade stuff, but it's just to get people to buy more coffee?
You mean like
It's
yourself?
just like, well, one might say that, you know, that it's just another form of marketing.
I think there's always danger when you raise your head. You know, we live unfortunately in a gotcha environment where everyone's looking to find something wrong instead of finding something better. But in the same courage that it takes to do the right thing for the consumer, you got to keep going. The other thing I would say is that we all have responsibility not to be a bystander. And when you see something that you know isn't right, and you see people being left behind, and you have resources or advantages, we've got to bring those people along. And if we don't, our station in life is not going to last. And that's why we have this unrest right now between the haves and have-nots in certain countries around the world. Look what's going on in Thailand as we speak right now. You know, the civil unrest in Greece just 2 weeks ago. There's really some very serious issues that have to be addressed, and we can't ignore it. As entrepreneurs, as business people, there are some very serious, significant challenges that have to be looked at for the first time in a very, very real way.
Question, please.
Zahara Scott from B Media. Mr. Schultz, I just wanted to thank you for your comments. I think it's a refreshing, perspective, primarily from someone with such a large corporation, a multinational corporation. But I want to press a bit because I think if you had thought bubbles of some of the companies in the room, the language and discussion around how you're growing your company and what's needed to be competitive in the marketplace, i.e. using authenticity, using values as a core, may not be as aligned. I guess my point is, how much are you an anomaly versus sort of the way sort of things are headed in terms of how CEOs are thinking about how to create competitive advantage in their companies?
I don't think we're an anomaly. I'm more encouraged than ever with regard to people who are running small and large companies, recognizing that, first of all, Starbucks doesn't own this model, and we're not a perfect company. We make mistakes every single day. But we want to lead with our heart, and I think because we're in such a consumer-facing business, it requires this kind of mentality. It's who we are and who we always have been. But I am encouraged by many, many companies and people in big areas of responsibility who understand that success has got to be shared and that you cannot build an enduring organization or enterprise by solely chasing profit. It's shallow and it's not sustainable.
Has the financial crisis changed people's attitudes?
Oh, I think it becomes harder for people to stand up and defend these kind of things. You know, the one thing which we didn't talk about is you have to perform. I mean, the price of admission with what I've described is you must perform, and that is that's just a must. But not at the expense of your people and not at the expense of your values.
Thank you.
Ariel Eckstein with LinkedIn. First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for a very thoughtful panel. Question for any or all of the panelists is, what is the one thing that both the private sector and the one thing that governments in the developed world can do to help the developing world continue to develop, or if not continue, to get them to continue to develop in a sustainable fashion?
Okay.
I mean, again, just to throw the extreme, like, individual perspective out there, I think imagine if anyone in those categories you named, you know, the developed world, governments, and businesses, I mean, what if every individual in that set of people made a commitment to one other individual on the other side of the planet or just downtown or wherever there is poverty and there are people living with needs that are going unmet, and actually made a commitment to another human being in a way that allowed them to kind of start to slowly change the game and change their trajectory. we'd be okay. And maybe that would actually play out in policy. Maybe it would play out in what companies are doing. But if we did that, I mean, it's pretty, I think it always comes down to sort of what we're intending to do as individuals.
And guess what? You can do it via Kiva.
That's also true.
I'd say there's a couple of points that I can very quickly touch on. I think the first one is that I think that many developing countries are more sustainable than we are, actually. So I don't think we should be thinking that we have the right way of living and we should be taking it out there. If you look at agriculture in the West, I mean, it's hugely demanding on the environment and on energy. I think the Netherlands is the world's largest grower of peppers, and it's done under masses of greenhouses that burn up, thousands, millions of tons of gas a year. And that's not sustainable. So I think the first thing is
just to play back to you something that Carl Henrik said this morning, which is as the standard of living rises in the developing world, they will become as great consumers of natural resources as we are now.
I think
Well,
I think one of the worrying things this morning that came out of the chat was this thing about trying to stimulate consumption. And I actually think that we're probably consuming enough, actually, as a planet. So I'm slightly uncomfortable with the model that we can keep growing and that we need to assume that we have the right ways of doing things. I see much more sustainable practices when I travel around developing countries and I see here where people have to drive 100 miles to get to work. This type of thing. But I think also in terms of the businesses, I think...
Okay, I can't resist asking Howard for an instant response to this. So this is really, a central...
Howard this time. I was talking about peppers.
No, but we have a consumer industry person here. This is a central issue, right? Do we want more growth in the world? Is that necessary for capitalism? Is it sustainable for the planet? What do you think?
Should I answer his question first?
No, answer this one first.
Well,
Ken has said maybe we don't need more consumption.
Well, I don't think we need more. It's like growth. You don't grow a company to get bigger. You grow a company to get better. So consumption for consumption's sake is not an enduring quality. So in a way, yes, I agree with you. But let me just, if I can answer something he asked, which I think is very important. We think that when we go to these developing countries, the primary reason we're going is to give back. And what I have found, we have a reason to go to Africa continuously, and every time I go to anywhere in Africa, what I find, and I'm not just saying this because it's the right thing to say on a panel like this, is I receive much, much more than I give. And the takeaway value that I'm able to share with people in our company about what it is I witnessed, what it is I saw, and the residual value of that is significant. And the thing that surprises me the most is when we go to these developing countries, we as Americans have so much, and yet we're anxious, we're depressed, we're not happy. We go to Africa, they have nothing. They live in mud huts, they don't have electricity, they don't have water, and they have so much joy and hope. And they're so happy. There's something wrong.
That's the point I was making, that I think our model isn't actually the model we should be necessarily sharing, because it's there are some pretty bad things, and I think our model might be flawed. Maybe they've got the right model.
Okay, and I cut you off, Ken, before you gave your one thing that we should be doing to make
Well, it was just a point
better.
in terms of businesses. I think businesses that operate in developing countries clearly have a better opportunity to make a difference. I think from the perspective of the work we do, mobile operators are present and manufacturers are present, and I think many could probably do more, lowering prices and so on to actually help people. But I think when a product clearly can empower people, as mobile phones can do, and if fair trade's done properly and people, coffee businesses source their coffee more fairly, it can increase incomes and kids go to school and it makes things better for people. So it's probably easier for you to do good than some people because of your market. But I think companies who actually operate in these spaces, many that I see could do a lot more than they are actually doing. And they can also offer more in-kind support to nonprofits.
Minouche, the one thing?
The one thing. I guess my answer would be for political leaders and business leaders to understand and convey a sense of interdependence. The one thing this crisis of the last couple of years has taught us is that, people defaulting on their mortgages in Midwestern states in the United States could bring the entire world economy down. And the decisions that are made in China about every power plant that they're building every day, a new power plant every day in China, will have huge consequences for flooding on the coast of the UK and for 25% of the landmass in Bangladesh in the next decade. So the degree to which we are interdependent is extraordinary, and in many ways this is both the upside and the downside of globalization. And I think the more we as citizens of the world realize that, the more we will want our leaders, both political and business leaders, to have policies that recognize that interdependence. And so that's policies around trade, around aid, around fair trade, around the environment, that recognize that new reality of interdependence.
Okay, and just before we take the next question, I can't resist pointing out that Professor Kahneman did actually tell us that having more money makes us happier. Up to
a point.
$80,000.
About $10,000, yeah?
What? How much? $80,000 in America. How much in the world? No idea. $10,000.
Roughly 10,000. I think that the curves of happiness start to come down. So, yeah.
Hello. Thank you. My name is Jesus Badenes. I come from Barcelona, Spain. I am still one of the few Spaniards who is fortunate enough to have a job. In fact, I work for Planeta, which is started as a publishing company, a book publishing company, and has become a media company. And my thoughts, basically addressed to Mr. Schultz, have to be with, first, starting with Maslow pyramid, which I think that Maslow basically established that according to our level of wealth, our needs, or the way we define our needs, change a lot. My question relating Maslow pyramid with Ubuntu, the concept that this morning's Archbishop Desmond Tutu basically shared with us, is that this Maslow pyramid, it seems that today it changes not according to wealth, but according to countries. It's to say, I guess that Starbucks sells unique experiences in drinking coffee and having social networking and many things. Probably the type of segmentation that you do in the US market is pretty different than the one you do in the Chinese market or in some African markets. So it seems that people looking for the same feelings are of a social extraction and wealth extraction quite differently. That is basically related as well with another concept, which is some marketing concept, which I think that today is getting more sophisticated. Henry Ford established like 100 years ago that you could have a Ford car, as long as it was black and 4T. Today, I was fortunate enough to hear from you that your menu list doesn't bring that much information from the web. I mean, you basically establish what the products you are going to offer, and those are the ones you offer. Before, we had a session called The Power of Data, which we didn't address quite well. I think that what we addressed was the acquisition of data and its ethical consequences, which was somewhat different. From a business perspective, you have established that for marketing, you are not also doing traditional marketing, but you basically infer what your customers want from different things. I would like you to discuss what's the right balance for a company like yours between push strategies and pull strategies. It's to say, I think that your menu list is a push strategy, whereas all the environment, the social environment you provide for customers is more pull. Thank you.
Okay, take that one.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, I think. Let me, I don't know if I'm smart enough to answer that question, but I'll take a shot at it. You mentioned Henry Ford, and there was a great Henry Ford quote. He said if he would have asked his customers what they wanted, they would have told him a horse. So there's a real balance, and not through arrogance or hubris, between an intuitive sense of what you think your customer wants and trying to provide them what they want. We've always been an intuitive company and not very marketing research driven. And so the imprinting of the company has always been more or less, we will provide our customers with an experience and we think they will respond. Now, having said that, one of the things that I think we've learned over this last year and a half during the cataclysmic financial crisis is we had to create a dialogue with our customers, the likes of which we've never done before. We went to a company called Salesforce.com. Michael Dell introduced me to them, and they created for us a open dialogue with our customers that we never did before, web-based, in which our customers would give us comments and suggestions and ideas. Now, there was an outcry of concern within the company culturally that we would do this. One, people were afraid that we would hear things from customers that we didn't want to hear, and then that we would not be able to respond. It created a tidal wave of communication and insight that we did not have. And it turned on a whole new way in which we would listen to our customers. One of the core things we did really well this year is we developed this very unique loyalty program based on the Starbucks card, which is 20% of all transactions in the US. That entire loyalty program came from our customers.
From
So,
this Salesforce.com thing?
more or less, yes. And so I think, like anything else, there's always a balance between an intuitive sense of what you think your customers want, developing empathy and listening really hard. And I think in this environment especially, there has to be more of leaning towards and leaning into the customer where they certainly understand and hear that you are responding to them as opposed to you driving what you think they want. I hope that answers your question in a way. The question was much more well-phrased and intelligent than my answer. I apologize.
That was a great answer. Okay, I think this is going to be our last question, unless anyone has any really passionate thing they need to know. So please.
Thanks. I've got a couple of comments. First of all, Amanda Jobbins from Cisco. And first of all, on happiness, I read a great study actually that said that happiness is defined by the distance between your house, your school, and your work. So that's something we should probably all think about. Second of all, Starbucks to me is a love mark. I've been going there pretty much every day since I think you opened. And my son would like a decaf frappuccino, please. So if you could put that on the menu and maybe some healthier food, then we'd be very happy. But on the
Healthier
social,
food.
well,
You don't like the
smaller
food
muffins,
offering
not the
too much.
400-calorie muffins. Yeah, slightly smaller maybe,
agree
and some
with
other good things. I know they've added that. So anyway, I'm in marketing, so I can't
knew you
help
would.
it. But on the social and the giving back topic, first of all, it was really, really inspiring to hear from all of you. And I think the Kiva model is absolutely fantastic, actually. I have to say, people to people, collaboration, innovating together. And I think you're really onto something there. And I think there's something we could all learn from that model. But my question for all the panelists is, what advice would you give all of us in business about the most apt initiative perhaps we could kick off in our own organizations to help developing countries and to help give back? Thank you.
Okay, we sort of answered that, but this should be focused on inside your company, and we have no time left, so very quick answers.
30-second response. Like you were saying, there's this idea, there's kind of a spectrum of doing market surveys or even being very, very intuitive about reaching out to customers. At Kiva and at companies that I admire a lot, there are tools built, like the feedback loops, tools built where people can actually not just be studied or observed and then responded to, but actually be co-creators of the initiatives and the projects. So I don't know the people in your company, I know some of them actually, but not all of them, and I don't know what they're thinking, what they're excited about. But I think something that's imposed versus something that's conjured and created would be better.
Ask people in Cisco what to do.
Yeah, and give them the tools to do it, and actually give them the control and the resources to do it too, which is really scary, but it, I think, works.
Very, very quick one. There's a scheme called Hope Phones, which was launched by somebody who's running a project using our software in health in developing countries. And healthcare workers can do amazing things if they have cell phones or mobile phones, just texting, communicating through rural health networks. So if you run a mobile phone recycling scheme in your company, get all those phones together, they can actually be reborn in a developing country in the hands of a community healthcare worker who can deliver very, very effective healthcare to some of the poorest people on the planet. So that's something very, very easy to do. We take iPhones as well, and Blackberries and all that kind of
iPads.
stuff. And Androids, yes, of course.
Yeah, two things. One, corporate social responsibility is nice, but look at your core business and look at your supply chain, look at the actual operations of your company and see how you can promote reducing poverty and promoting development in your core business, not on the side. And second thing is, small is beautiful, but big is necessary. So look at costs. only do stuff that's sustainable, and because the next time there's an economic crunch, it'll be the first thing to get cut. So focus on stuff that's cost effective and you can scale.
Well, we do a cultural survey at least once a year with all our people, and consistently the number one attribute that they give the company highest marks for is giving our people an opportunity to give back on company time.
Well, thank you all very, very much. And now please do join me in thanking our really fantastic and open and innovative panel. Thank you.